heritage. And we have 180 members in Malaysia, so about 300. And then we have 50 people who used to be members, continue to be members, but living overseas, so expats who return to their country. Now, when we talk about classic cars, there are in fact three eras of classic cars. The first is vintage, which starts from the period when Daimler-Benz invented the car, initially almost as something experimental. And it goes all the way from there to pre-war, which is 1939. So you see a huge, long epoch period when, during that period, the main inspiration originally was the horse carriage. When we say 1939 and pre-war, there are some countries where car production continued till up till 1942. So Italy continued with some of their car production despite the Second World War. The second era is what we call the classic era. And the classic era starts from just after the war, 1946, generally when car production resumed at the end of the war, up till 1959. And the third is what you call the modern classics, which is 1960, very easy. And in Singapore, it's up till 1996. And you can import cars which are 1996 or older into Singapore under the classic car regime. Now, what I want to do is just tell you a little bit about those different eras, and you're standing in a perfect place because you can see a 1926 Rolls-Royce, that's part of the vintage era, and you can see alongside it two cars which are from the classic era. They're both pre-1960 cars, right? One is the Sunbeam Rapier, stunningly looking, stunning car. It was a race, and they were race rallied cars, and that's a family saloon. Now, what do you know, what can I tell you about this car? It's fascinating because its history mirrors that of the Fullerton collection. The Fullerton Hotel opened in 1928, but construction started on the General Post Office as it then was 4 years prior to that. But Clifford Pier, and all of this is part of the Fullerton collection, opened in 1926. And one of the first cars imported into Singapore through Clifford Pier was this car. It arrived on the 25th of June 1926, and the documents, I think it's probably not, the documents of its shipping, the vessel it came on, and it's stamped through Clifford Pier are in that little cubby box. It's a very rare Rolls-Royce. Now what you see about this is, doesn't it remind you of a horse and carriage? Because you see, in the early days, the main method of transport for the rich was, of course, horse carriages. Yes? And when the first cars were built and they became vehicles that you could get around with, they were aspirational. So people then started taking their basic cars and getting specialist coach builders, the people who built old horse carriages, to make them smarter. So this is a coach-built car from Connaught, a famous coach builder. It's a Tourer, which means it's open top. And the owners were enthusiasts often who drove it themselves. And I have a photograph of my grandfather driving one of the first sports cars open top in Malaya in 1919, 1920, an Overland Tourer. He's sitting in it, driving it, and his chauffeur is next to him. So that was the passion of the classic car drivers. So they either drove it themselves, or they sat at the back, and it was like a horse carriage. It was a status symbol. Now, after the war, people fought and died for the war, for their country and what they believed in, freedom. So there was a sense that people deserved a new deal. And with the end of the war, you would find that people like Attlee, Prime Minister of Britain, promised the people that they would be able to have free education, national health was introduced, and that they'd be able to enjoy comforts of life. So instead of these grand cars, which would take husband and wife and the chauffeur, you had the family car, where mum and dad and the two children could drive down to the beach. So that was the evolution connected with social norms. Society changed. In the early days, in many parts of the world, with the exception of, America and the Model T Ford, which made motoring available to all, and that was his huge contribution, motoring was actually limited to a small group of the population. during the classic era, it became a means of transport for a larger group of people. The average aspirational middle-class person wanted to have a car. Whether it was in Britain, Germany, France, Italy, America, and even Japan, which was coming out of the war and started its car manufacturing. So that's the classic era. We then go on to what we would call... Now, the thing about classic car owners around the world is firstly their passion, secondly, they draw inspiration from these, thirdly, it is a tremendous enthusiasm. We have a love for cars. I'm privileged to have 6 classic cars. Everyone has a name, every one of them has a personality, and depending on how I feel on a particular day, each one mirrors a different sense. Now, with the classic cars, one of the nice things is they gave you a true sense of driving. You heard the roar of the engine. Sorry, I don't know. Can you hear me? The roar of the engine. You had the sense of being in control. You had a sense that you were going somewhere and enjoying the journey. You know, it's not like your hybrid cars now, which are so silent. So I think those are part of the enduring charms of these cars. And that's why when people drive these cars, and even when we meet each other on the road, you know, we thumbs up each other, because there is a certain passion and camaraderie associated with it. It mustn't be thought of as sexist, because actually there are a lot of women who are also active owners of cars or great supporters of their partners who love these cars. And actually there are many long-suffering wives who are what you call classic car widows. Because, you know, the husbands enjoy a Saturday and Sunday rather going out with the car than going out with the wife. But it's quite... Now I want to take you to the modern classics. During the era of the modern classics from 1960 onwards is we got a lot of technological developments. With technological developments you started getting things like, for the first time, automatic. Proper automatics. Some of the early cars, even vintage